Hello friends, I am Rob, the Dungeon Tutor, and today I'm here to answer a heartfelt question that's been sent out. I see this in a variety of groups, but this one comes from my group, Dungeons and Dads, which is us gamer dads with kids just trying to make things work. And a lot of the things I hear is a lot of these dads have kids who are interested in gaming, but they themselves don't come from a gaming background, or maybe they played in the past, but now it's time to take up the reins as the adult in the room and run games for their kids, which is really cool. It's a great feeling. But how? If you've never done it before, it may seem arcane, it may seem difficult, it may seem impenetrable. And I'm here to help with that. So, first of all, this is going to be general game mastering advice, but I'm going to focus on 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons because I think that's the most accessible game for most people these days. And it's the one the most people are talking about, so I think it's going to help the most people. If you're interested in game mastering responsibilities for a game that is not Dungeons & Dragons, please let me know. I would be happy to fill in extra details for games specifically not Dungeons & Dragons. So, first of all, you have players interested, be they your kids or something else. You are going to be the game master. How do you start? First of all, and I think this is very important, read the rules. Now, I'm not going to tell you to memorize the rules. I'm not even going to tell you to understand the rules at this point. Just read them first. And not all the rules. Don't go crazy and get all the books. Read the most basic rules that are there, because they'll fill you in on the details that you'll come back to the most. So, for instance, if you're playing 5th edition D&D, go to wizards.com, look at the basic rules. They're all there. It's about 50 pages. And they explain all the basic mechanics on how to play the game. If you don't understand the game, it's going to be really hard to run it. I've tried. It doesn't work very well. So, the first thing I recommend doing a read-through of the rules. So, this isn't for comprehension. This is just to let the game's developers explain to you how their game works as best as possible. And the thing I like about the basic rules is that it strips out all the examples and everything, and it just gives it to you straight up, like you're the adult in the room, and they're talking to you and trying to get you to understand their game in as concise a manner as possible. It's not very intimidating, and it's written in a language to teach from somebody who has no background in role-playing games. So if you do, you've got a leg up, but it's still good reading. Now, I can tell you that the core mechanic that you should be picking up from reading the rules is that for almost any circumstance, the game resolves any issues by taking a 20-sided die. I know I've got one around here somewhere. Here we go. 20-sided die, 1 to 20, there you go. Finding what you're doing relates to. If you're going to try to jump across a gap, well, that's your strength, but some people are really skilled at jumping and they have athletics as a skill. So they would take their athletics bonus and add it to the result of a 20-sided die roll and compare it against the difficulty of the jump. The wider the jump, the greater the difficulty number. Pretty easy to understand if you break it down to something simple like that. It's just a matter then for the game master to decide what is going to apply to anything that you do. Now in combat, a lot of that stuff is prescribed. For example, your bonus to hit with a weapon, if you're going to fight something, is going to be first of all, you have the 20-sided die roll, so you're rolling to resolve. The bonus that you add is equal to the attribute that governs how they're attacking. If they're trying to attack something with a large heavy object, like a greatsword, you're using strength. You're trying to pummel through that opponent's defense or chop through that armor and deliver damage. If you're trying to deliver damage based on your nimbleness, that's dexterity, and that applies to weapons that are finesse-based. That's going to be like your short swords, your daggers, your rapiers, something that isn't necessarily based on how hard you hit, but how well you hit in the vulnerable spots to do the damage. Now, if you're really strong and you have a finesse weapon, you can still use your strength. You can still punch somebody to death with your rapier. Doesn't mean that you have to be all finesse swashbuckler style. You can still use that in hand-to-hand weapons. But for some things, some nimbler opponents do have an advantage with certain weapons. Missile weapons, like bows and crossbows, are based off your dexterity. And some thrown weapons, well, those are still based on strength, so your spears and things of that nature. But you figure that out, and if you are skilled in that weapon, you get to add your proficiency bonus. It's a general term that replaces everything on showing how your character gets better as you level up. It starts out at a small +2, not insignificant, but it is smaller, and it goes up as the characters level up, making them more and more adept. It also means that the amount that their proficiency bonus goes up also kind of meters the challenges that they're going to face. For instance, there's no reason to have a creature with an armor class of 35, that's the target number they need to hit with a weapon, when your characters are only 3rd and 4th level. They'll never have a bonus that's high enough to hit that. So, as a result, the difficulties to hit things, their armor classes are a lot lower for challenges for lower level characters. So, even at the highest level, you don't need to go into really high math, which is one of the strengths of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. But once you understand that, for anything that's in doubt, you roll a die and you look to add something to that die result. Or subtract. Bear in mind, not everybody is great at everything. So if you're, say, barbarian in the group, wants to roll to see if they know something, and their character has a low intelligence score, and they're trying to recall something they're not trained in, but there's a chance they might have found something out about this information, then they would roll a die and they would subtract the penalty that that score gives. Doesn't happen very often in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, but sometimes it does happen. So, that's the core mechanic of 5th edition D&D. If you understand that, the rest of it is relatively simple. Just determining what you apply and when you apply it, like leveling up and rolling a hit die and adding your constitution modifier, or when you're healing up during a rest, you can roll one of your hit dice and add that to your hit point total. It shows that you're bandaging up, that you're taking a rest, a breather. It all helps out. Rolling damage after you've successfully hit somebody. Based on the size of the weapon, that determines the value of the die that you roll, and whatever your attribute was that you used to hit adds on its bonus to the damage. Some fairly simple mechanics once you get down to it, but the core one that you should learn right away from the basic rules: roll a 20-sided die and add something to it, and that will tell you if you succeed or fail. Now, as the game master, it's often up to you to determine if something succeeds or fails. But we'll cover that in a little bit. Right now, the basic mechanic of the game is what you need to come to terms with. Now, this is something you should also do if you were playing for the first time, too. So, as the game master, you're kind of the first player, if you want to think about it that way. Which is why, if you're coming down to learning how to play and learning how to game master, the first book you should go to isn't necessarily the Game Master's Guide, or the Dungeon Master's Guide in D&D's case. It's the player's handbook, so you understand the rules. Because if there are any questions about the rules, the players are going to come to you as the arbiter, as the referee. So you should have an idea, at least, of how the rules run. So, you've read the basic rules. Good job. So you now have an inkling of how this works. In the basic rules, there are character creation mechanics. You can use that to help your players understand how to make a character, which is good. And, of course, you now know a little bit about the mechanics on how to rest, how to attack, how to run away, and how movement might work. That's all explained in the basic rules, and that's good to know. Everybody should know that, but as the Game Master, your players may have lapses. It's up to you to kind of govern that. Now, also at this time, you should also think about, a little bit about who's playing with you. If this is your first time, hopefully you know your players. If they're your kids, for instance, you know your kids. You kind of know what they like, what their attention span is like, what kind of things they're interested in, hopefully. And if so, you should kind of try to focus on those things that'll engage your players at the level they're at. If they really love the idea of combat and breaking down challenges by how easy it is to fight, concentrate on the combat rules. They'll come up again and again. If your audience is more interested in role-playing and portraying a character within your world, maybe using voice, or maybe actually getting into the role and not telling you things as your kid Jim or as the person sitting across, but instead they are Farbreach the elf. Well, then maybe it's a good idea to understand what all can go into characterizing different roles. That could be pretty useful too. We'll cover that. So, you got the basic rules down, which is great. Now, this is assuming you're coming into it from scratch, so where do you go from there? Now, my recommendation, if you have no other tools, and if you do, then you can ignore this part, feel free. But I recommend going out and getting one of these starter sets. There's a couple of them. This is the first starter set that came out, but they also have the Essentials kit. They have the excuse me, they have the Stranger Things starter set. Any of these work pretty well. They give you a couple of things right out of the box that are very, very helpful. First of all, they give you the essentials that you need. In this case, they give you your first set of dice. If you don't have dice, you're going to need some. If you do have dice, having an extra set around in case one of your players forgets their dice or may not have one, just too useful to have. Secondly, this gives you pre-generated characters for the little adventure that comes with it. These pre-generated characters show you what a finished character sheet should look like, number one. If you are going to make your own characters, it's at least good to have something to look at and see if you're doing everything right. All the numbers are filled in and things make sense. The nice thing about this set, and I've covered this in my Lair of Omnissiah set, but the nice thing about this set is that it has characters that are created for the adventure already in the box. So by using these characters, they're already tied into the elements in the adventure, everything you need right off the bat to do one of what has become one of the more famous adventures in 5th edition, The Lost Mines of Phandelver. And then, along with that, it's got a great adventure, The Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is a fun little adventure and great for bringing players into the game, showing them all the different mechanics, giving them opportunities for all the different elements of play. And it's written in such a way to make it easy and engaging for the game master, the dungeon master, to play a part in the whole thing. You don't just read it as it is and read it out to the players and let them gain off it. It gives a lot of tips and advice on how to portray things, what to watch out for, potential choke points that could frustrate your players. Written as a comforting guide for a person who's running this game for the first time. So for a first-time game master, this is an excellent resource. Highly recommended. It also has a few maps in it that give you color maps to imagine the area that your players are going to be running in. If you're getting your first taste of tactical combat, where ranges might matter, where intervening walls might give you cover or might provide cover for your enemies, having something like this is a great way to show you how it can be done. It's not necessarily the ironclad way that it must be done, but it is a good resource to use for game masters who are trying out a variety of things for the first time. So, something like this is a really nice resource, and your players might really enjoy running through the adventure, so I think it's a fairly decent value. The Essentials kit is much the same, and that one has some nice resources as far as cards with statuses and things like that for game masters to use as a reference that you can use beyond playing in the adventure that comes with it. So that's pretty cool. One of the things this does not have is miniatures, those wonderful little plastic figures that represent your characters. Does not have that. So if you want to have your players' characters in the game, you're going to need to find some or find something to replicate them. Rating your board games and finding playing pieces to represent each person's character, not a bad way to go at all. And if you do that, then, you know, as long as everybody knows what's going on and can wrap their imaginations around it, you're fine. Everything else is just gravy. Having a character that looks like the character that you're imagining is great, but it's not essential. So, depends on how far down the rabbit hole you really want to go. But it's a good way to start. So, if you decide buying the starter kit isn't for you, oh yeah, one other thing with that, it also comes with a print copy of the basic rules. Very handy to be able to hand out at the table or reference while you're playing. Although these days most people have a smartphone or a tablet, and that can really cut down on your reliance on having physical paper stock around to refer to. But if you decide you don't want to go that way and you just want to go whole hog right into it, or if you've already personally progressed beyond the point of needing a starter set, you kind of know how it all works, you just want to know how to do it. Alright, first of all, well, I said it earlier, Player's Handbook. Not only is this a wonderful resource for your players, it's almost essential for the Game Master, for a couple of reasons. Number one, as I said, you're the arbiter of the rules. It's one of the hats you wear. So if you don't know the rules, you're going to be relying on flipping through this a lot. It's going to slow down your game. It's going to cut down on the immersion your players feel. It's going to make your game very stop and start, stop and start. If you're the kind of person who takes notes on things, it's a good thing to do with this. Especially with things that you find keep coming up over and over again. And keeping notes as you're running games helps you to get better faster. So, I definitely advise making cheat sheets for yourself. It can be very useful until at least you've gotten the core principles of the game down. So, the good news is, the way 5th edition is, it's an evolution of a game that's been around since the 70s. There are a lot of improvements in the game, such that many of the rules that you're going to refer to are already on the character sheets. If the character sheets are filled out successfully, most of the things you can refer to what the characters can and can't do are going to be printed there on their sheets. Everything else that might need to be referenced may already have a shortcut to it. For instance, if somebody's playing as a spellcaster, a large chunk of this book is based on the magic of the game, explaining all the spells and what they can do. But if you want to spend a little money and save yourself some time and trouble and make it easier for a person to play a spellcaster, investing in one of those spell decks that explains all of the different spells that are available from this book can save you a lot of time. It also makes it much easier for them to compose which spells they have known, what they can refer to in the course of the game. So, basically you can treat yourself to make it as easy as you want it to be. But at the core, as a game master, you should at least know the basic principles of the game. All that stuff I said about 20-sided dice before absolutely applies. And now that you've gotten to this level, you should know other things like, what are the mechanics of a short rest versus a long rest? A long rest basically refreshes your character back to start. You're perfectly fine, you've got all of your resources ahead of you, you're fully healed. A short rest is less so. There's actually some strategy involved in using short rests. So, that's all in here too. As far as the ins and outs of all those wonderful characters that your players will be making. That at least has a base in here, the core classes. After that, there are different paths. Maybe you use other books, and that's fine. But what's in here can give you very satisfying characters too, so you're fine. But if you at least understand a chunk of what's important in here, that's good. Also, in the back of this, one of the appendixes has some sample monsters for you. Cuts down a little bit on your reliance on having other books down the road that'll explain a wide variety of monsters. It'll at least cover a lot of the ones that come up frequently, especially things like pets for your players to run across, beasts, sample NPCs, things like that. So, another thing this book is really good for is teaching you some of the jargon of the game. What is an NPC? Non-player character. It's everybody in the game that isn't controlled by one of the characters. You know, and it just goes on from there. But all of that is located inside this book, which is why this is a great way to start. Hands down. Of course, if you come across anything and something and there's a stumbling block for you, let me know. I'll explain it or make a video for you to supplement this video, so feel free to ask. Second thing, Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, this book, for somebody who's run the game, is something that we don't reference that often, because most of what we do in the course of the game is making judgment calls based on what the characters can already do. This is a great read that helps you to structure your world and make it come to life for your players, to make it live and breathe. Which is useful not only if you are going to create your own world, which, then it's an awesome resource, but also if you're going to take a pre-existing world like that Lost Mines of Phandelver, shine it up a little bit and let players have the full experience of living their life in this fantasy world, rather than going from encounter to encounter to encounter to encounter to the end. So, this has all of your treasure, too, magical items and things, which a lot of people, that is the reason that they go out and adventure. This also has some great alternate rules that you can use to tailor the game to your style. For instance, if you don't like that the players, after 8 hours of rest, no matter how heinous a combat they just went through, they are perfectly fine, perfectly refreshed, as long as they had that 8 hours of uninterrupted rest. Some people really hate that. Some people think that, no, if I just got the stuffing knocked out of me, 8 hours of rest is not enough. If that was the case, then there wouldn't be sports trainers, for instance. They just tell you to take a rest and you'd be fine. No, but here's the thing. D&D represents cinematic reality far so than actual reality. So your heroes are the heroes in the movie, who, as of the next scene, will be fine and ready to keep going. Oh, they might have some bandages on them, sure, but it's not going to stop them from being appropriately heroic. And that is the reality that D&D is trying to portray. So understanding that hit points aren't necessarily a matter of how much blood has been spilled on you. It may just mean you're exhausted, and that next blow that comes in, you can't defend yourself, you're wide open, and it will finish you off. That's all in here. That's explained through here on how to make your world feel real, and if you don't like elements of the game, something rankles with you, there might be a really cool alternate rule in here to help you with that. So it's a nice resource to have. If you have game mastering experience prior, it's not something you go to as often, except for it's good reading material, and it may remind you of a few things. But this is not the thing that you generally have open at the game table behind your screen. It's something you might refer to in between games, or if you on the fly need a magical item to give to the players or need a reminder of something, it's nice to have. As far as teaching a brand new person how to run a game, though, and how to make their world live and breathe, it is a nice thing to have. It's a really good thing to read cover to cover for your first time, because it will arm you with a lot of things that will head off problems down the road. This also is a lot to cram into your head. Note-taking is also a good idea here. Again, cheat sheets are your friend. At the very least, page references, so that if something comes up, you can say, okay, let me just go to that. Some people also like to put tabs and sticky notes into their books, too, to further help illuminate and illustrate. And that's fine. I haven't, but I'm not cutting down anybody who does. It's your book. Have fun with it. Give it a little character anyhow. So, with that, you are ready to start as a game master. It involves numbers of steps, however, to properly do so. The first step is arming yourself with the knowledge that you need, because the players are going to come to you as the arbiter of the world. And if you don't understand how the world works, it's going to be very complicated. So, that's the first thing that every game master should do, is know as much as you can about the world, about the game, so that you can run it for your players. Now, after that step, after you know, then it's time to decide what the adventure is going to be. Now, I already recommended The Lost Mines of Phandelver for your starting adventure, both because of how it's written and because it's a pretty good challenge for starting players. There are some areas that are tough and will require them to start grasping how the game works and absorbing it quickly. It also will, for the largest part, show you how a game is structured, how to set up an encounter to provide extra challenge for your players, how to throw a twist in every now and again so that a staid, boring encounter gets a little life and pep to it to excite your players and make them really have to think or backpedal and maybe learn some lessons, like not blowing all of your most powerful resources right away because something else bigger and nastier might come in that you really wish you'd had that stuff for. So, these are all very nice elements to teach. But once you've gone beyond that step, or if you decide to sidestep one of the starter sets, you'll have to decide what to run. Now, there are some very useful adventures out there, certainly. Not just ones made by Wizards of the Coast, the creators of Dungeons & Dragons at the moment, but also third parties have some excellent adventures too. And deciding which one is the right one is going to largely depend on your group. So, if your group really has a short attention span, a dungeon crawl might not be the best thing for them, because trekking through a dungeon, even as exciting as it might be, might get a little old, encounter after encounter after encounter. Anybody who's had to grind in a video game for experience or loot kind of might know what that's like. Now imagine that in somebody who has a short attention span, and you know, that's really a struggle. And you want to remove as much struggle as possible from your players to enjoy the game. So knowing your players is a huge benefit. But at the very least, knowing how games can be structured encounter to encounter and varying the encounters. Sometimes it might involve combat. If your players really like combat, more combat encounters are appropriate. If your players, though, ever start running out of patience for the combat, a game like Dungeons & Dragons offers all kinds of other things you can do. There's exploration, which means they can use some of the other skills other than casting spells or swinging swords, so that they can reveal the world around them and see new sights, and you can magnify the elements that seem wondrous and cool and bring their interest to life that way. You can also, of course, indulge in a little bit of role play, where you talk to your players as one of the NPCs and let them talk back as their characters. Some people like that, some people don't. Understanding your players and what they like and what they engage with as you're running the game is definitely how you tailor your own style to meet your players to become the most awesome game master for that you can be. So, Lost Mines of Phandelver gives you opportunities for doing all of these things. Exploration and trekking. Fighting. Either because there's an encounter that clearly can only be resolved by combat, or because the players decide that's the best way to deal with this given scenario, and giving them the initiative on how they react. And sometimes, just good role play, talking with people, getting something of note by using your social skills. It's got a nice balance of all of that. So, you have to decide, what game are you going to run? Now again, there are plenty of adventure paths from D&D. Many of them start from low levels so that you can build their characters, build their familiarity with the world and the situation they find themselves in, and really enjoy telling the shared story together. Others start at higher levels, and maybe you want to start a game with more powerful characters and let the players have a variety of abilities and not feel as vulnerable as they did back in first level. It's fine. It's a different style, and not one that I generally recommend for beginning players, but if your players have some experience and you're taking a whack at it, say they've started and stopped a few other adventures and now they want to take a crack at a higher level group, say a 5th or 6th level group, then have at it. There are adventures for that. Maybe you want to go through a series of modules, which are one-beat adventures that have a beginning, middle, and end, and it wraps up all inside of a level or two's worth of adventuring. That was how I got my start, is going through module after module after module after module after module. Something to be said for that. It does kind of lead your characters to kind of become disassociated murder hobos, though, where they don't have a strong attachment to one spot, which is something that's kind of rectified in the adventure story paths from Dungeons & Dragons. But to your own self be true. Whatever you think your players are going to enjoy the most, I recommend looking in that direction to start with. You can explore, you can see what people are interested in, and then tailor it on the fly. It's not a commitment what you throw out in the beginning. If the players just don't like it, don't feel it, you can change from session to session, trying to tailor things to meet the players' needs. And also, gotta remember, you're also a participant. What you enjoy as well is important. So if you really enjoy role-playing with your audience, whether it's a dad and their kids or you know, whatever, if you really enjoy the role-play, make sure you put some elements of role-play in. Even if they don't love it, If you don't make it mission critical that they role play, just give some light role play that scratches your itch but doesn't abrade everyone else at the table, and you'll probably be okay. If they start to really like something, players learn. They can be trained in their own way to pick up on the things that you want them to know. For instance, if somebody struggles with the basic intricacies of combat, you can run very simple combats with that character so that they can learn as they go without being brutally punished by throwing Machiavellian encounters with multiple layers and dimensions and a couple of twists and surprises. Bring them along slowly and use building blocks to give them a solid foundation to build from, and you'll probably be okay. Because, honestly, one of the hats us game masters wear is being a teacher. Being an ambassador for your own game, giving them things that they'll be excited about and draw them in. Eventually, hopefully being fully participating, willing players who make your game better. That's what we're shooting for here. Okay. So, you've picked an adventure. Good job. That's sometimes tough because there are a lot of choices out there, but you've picked an adventure. Now, understand the adventure. Okay? This can be simple. This might be difficult. Depends on the adventure you've picked. The most simple ones, like the Lost Mines of Phandelver, are what we call a railroad. They're fairly linear. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and while there might be a few branching paths along the way, like a dungeon that has side rooms that you can go along and places to explore, for the most part, they have a point and a purpose and the story that's meant to draw your players through them from the beginning to the finish. And those are the easiest ones to run, let's face it. Your players, you hope, are going to be engaged in that storyline and want to see it through to its completion. But if the players aren't engaged in the opening story, you lost them, they'll possibly try branching off into other different directions. And a beginning game master, that can be really frustrating if your players are constantly bucking against your story. Which is why I like the starter set, because the characters that are in it have backgrounds and character traits that are tied into the adventure itself. It's one of the strengths of that set. The characters all have reasons based on their backgrounds to want to complete the adventure, to want to involve themselves. And you shouldn't, if they are playing their characters, you shouldn't constantly be having to drag them back into the story, because this is something they want. Now, if you are taking something else, like an adventure path, like Princes of the Apocalypse, for instance, then you have to look at the characters that they've got and decide how you're going to involve them in that story. It might involve tinkering a little bit. It's a little trickier. Which is why, again, I recommend starting with something like Lost Mines of Phandelver. But customizing something will be, something that you'll have to deal with. Now, you've got the adventure. Now you've read it. You understand it. You know what the flow of the story is supposed to be. Maybe you understand a couple of adventure paths that you can throw out to sprinkle some differences into your game, which is cool. Maybe you even have a couple of other resources you can draw from. For example, in a long story path like Princes of the Apocalypse, maybe your players just kind of get tired of the grind of going after elemental cultists that seem crazy and illogical. Well, if you pick up something like, we'll say, Candlekeep Mysteries or Tales from the Yawning Portal, they have side adventures that you can tie your players into for a little bit, let them have a chance at some experience that isn't tied down to a heavy overarching plot, have what might be a really cool little adventure that they can do that isn't tied into the overall plot, and as a change of pace, that can help to enliven a game too. There's plenty of time afterward to bring them back into the story, and now maybe with a few new tools and trinkets that they can use to leverage their will against the story a little bit more, maybe blow by some things that were annoying them or were kind of slowing the game down. If they just blast through the stronghold that was giving them some problems earlier because they all just got a new magical weapon and the wizard learned a new spell that is just absolutely brilliant for bashing these cultists, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't cheapen the adventure. They still get to live through the adventure, but on their terms, which ultimately, giving the players some agency on the direction they go can feel liberating. But we haven't even gotten to that part yet, have we? This is all the stuff that you have prepared. You've got your knowledge, your head is full of lore, and maybe you have a pile of cheat sheets in front of you. Awesome. You have the adventure prepared. You know what you want to run. And you've got the players that are eager to play, we hope. You've got all that together. You're ready to get started. I said started, yes. So far, you haven't game mastered. You have gotten the tools ready to game master. But you haven't started it yet. This starts, quite possibly, with a session 0. Now, session 0 is, I consider, the almost essential very first step of the game, which is characters are not created yet or have not been handed out yet. Players come to the table to meet with the game master so that everybody can come to a common ground and understand where the adventure is starting from. This is an ideal time to make up your characters or to hand out pre-generated characters as you have them. Now, why do I recommend doing it this way rather than just having the players come with the characters they've already made? 2 reasons. Number 1, the players can kind of talk to each other and decide, to tell this story right, should we have, say, a fighter? Do we need somebody who's a fighter? And maybe somebody will want to do that. Maybe somebody will be like, yeah, I'll be the fighter. I'll be the one in the front and protecting everybody else so that everybody else can do their thing. Sure. Some people really like to collaborate on what the party makeup should be before they started to play. And this gives you an opportunity for everybody to talk this over. But what it also, far more importantly, is a chance for you to open up your dialogue as the dungeon master to the players. This is the setting. This is the world you're in. These are the events that are going on that are going to draw things into place. Now, when you're coming up with the idea for your characters, I want you to bear in mind these events and figure out how we're going to tie all of them into the story. Now, you don't have to give away everything, of course. Just where they're going to start and what's pushing the adventure forward is usually all you need to do. And then let the players come up with things after that. But for game masters with a really detailed world, for instance, if somebody, say, wants to play a character with a noble background, maybe you already have a list of nobles available, and maybe you have some preferred for this adventure to interject themselves into the story. Maybe it involves a noble house or two, and therefore you can give some guidance to the player who wants to be a noble. It's like, hey, just to tie you into this world a little bit better, you come from this house. This might be your last name, and you already have this proud tradition around you. Well, now that character just became a bit more important to the world, didn't they? They're not just free-floating elements, they're actually tied in and have a reason to be in the world and participate. So their characters become even more a part of your story than just the folks who come in from the outside and all of a sudden they start actoring into the world. And yes, I said that right, actoring, because it's kind of traditional in a movie. You get the actors who are clearly the heroes who come in from the outside and then things change because they start acting on the story. That trope kind of works in a movie because we expect it to, but in a role-playing game, it's actually harder. Because now your characters have to find their motivations into why they're doing the things. Maybe it's because there's a reward, maybe because one of them has a heart of gold, maybe because one of them has a religious order that dictates how they're supposed to act. It becomes a bit more esoteric at that point. Whereas if your characters are already part of that world, you're set. You're golden. You don't have to do anything else. You know that once you've portrayed what your world is like and how they're interacting with it, you can count on them to go forward if they understand what their characters are. So by doing this exchange of information with your players and collaborating on some ideas, you might allow them to help build a world around you too. Maybe they have things that they have ideas for that you can go, oh, that's cool, I want to use that. So I recommend it be more of a dialogue than a dictation, but you do you. Depends on how realized your world is. Some game masters come to the session 0 with just a very sketchy bag of notes, and that can work for some people, especially if you're really good at improvising. But otherwise, it's not a bad idea to have enough information about how your adventure is going to go that you can pass on enough to your players to get them to start being excited about being a part of this world and excited for the action that's coming up. So, you got that down. Now you've had a session 0. Now the players have their characters. Do you start playing right away? You could. I recommend having a preliminary encounter, not necessarily an episode of your story, but an encounter. Something to encapsulate for them that their characters may have bonds or places where they intersect with the story, and it all comes into one single encounter. Most archetypal of that is, well, the tavern is full except for one table. It has your character sitting at it, but there's nowhere else for anybody else to sit. All of you decide that you want to sit over at that table, and that's when the old man comes up and just as with his dying breath, he drops a map in the middle of the table. It's hackneyed. That's, you know, it might only work for people who are relatively really inexperienced with gaming tropes, but that would be one example of how you could do it. There are far better ones, though. If you understand the story, making the characters who, at least explaining to the characters why they should care about certain things can get you far more in motion, making your players have their stride as they hit the game. But one way or the other, the encounter should try to draw the characters together, maybe let them have a cool moment where they can show off a skill or two, maybe show off some element of their character's personality so that it kind of explains who they are and what their outlook is, which can be so useful to starting to build that group chemistry. I don't recommend that you go into long role-playing sessions after that initial session 0 meetup, though, because you've got some work to do, Game Master. You really do. First of all, once that game session ends, during session 0, you should be taking notes if you don't actually take their character sheets. Take notes on everything they did. Understand their characters. And that's why having some sort of a notebook to keep that information in is really useful. So, you write down their names. You write down the race, class, background, or the key things to breaking down their element. Alignment if you use that. Starting attributes, just so you have a record of what their numbers are. Just in case the little suckers decide they want to start changing the numbers a little bit, you at least know what they were supposed to be at start. That does happen once in a while, but hopefully rarely. The game has you have to have a certain assumption of integrity for the numbers to matter for anything. Also, the most important part to me, if you filled out all the parts on that character sheet, the personality, the goals, the flaws, the bonds, those elements are important for you to see if they're trying to roleplay those characters. It's also essential, if you're going to tie their characters into that adventure, those are the heartstrings you're going to want to tug on. So having elements in the game where those are going to come up is really important. If, say, a character is looking for true love, and you immediately go into a dungeon crawl, what are the elements of finding true love in a dungeon? Yeah, I know there's an anime based on that, but realistically, if you don't give reasons for them to act on those personality quirks, those spurs and hindrances, and really test their characters for role-playing, why would you ever give out some mechanic like inspiration or really reward them? They're just going through a tactical exercise at that point. So a game master should tailor their encounters, tailor the adventure itself in some cases, based on what the players have given you. What their characters are interested in should match some of the beats that come up in the adventure. That's why they keep doing the adventure. That's why they don't quit halfway through and go, you know what, I'm tired of dealing with these stupid cults. Somebody else can beat them. I'm going to go off to the next adventure. You know, you want to invoke that. So if you're being a custodian of the adventure as your game master, you should make note of those things the players have given you. Also, if they handed you a sheet of papers for their backgrounds, well, hey, I've got all kinds of elements that I can read through and see, well, this person has a sister. Maybe that might come up in an adventure. If I want them to go in a certain direction, maybe the sister gets kidnapped. Maybe the sister needs something and it can only be found at this place. You've given me elements that, again, tie your character into the world that I might use. But here's an important thing, and I can't stress this enough. Don't use background strictly to punish players. Don't use that as a smorgasbord of all the different ways you can tug and pull and wrench at your characters. Sometimes reward them. Hey, you've got a brother. He got married. He's getting married. You have an invitation to go to the wedding. If the players love role-playing games, hey, we go to the wedding, we have a great time, we meet some great people, there's a number of good opportunities for role-play here. And for coming, maybe everybody had to come up with a creative wedding present or something. It's customary for the groom to give out presents to everybody as well. So hey, you guys have been getting beaten up a lot. First of all, he's going to give you a small cask of healing potion. Hey, there's 6 doses of healing potion in that. That might save your life. Oh, and you, his beloved brother, who stood up as his witness to accept his vows of faithfulness to his new bride, to you, he's giving you this new gleaming sword. It cost him dearly, but he wants you to not only be successful in your adventures, but to have this to remember him by. And maybe this is more than just a +1 sword that they'll eventually toss off to the side because they found a +2 sword. It's the sword his brother gave him on his wedding. And maybe that's something you make a little bit cooler. Maybe, it's got a pearl handle, and it's got a beautiful gold steel blade. It looks like it's gold, but it actually has the hardness of steel, or maybe something even more. It's a beautiful weapon. That's something that players can grab onto, makes the world more real, and gives them something to value, sometimes beyond just the accumulation of some gold. It gives them something that their characters would think about and care about. And that all comes because you read the background. You read that they have a brother, and at some point they needed a little elevation. They needed something else. So, you use all those resources together. Now you've got a nice bubbling stew of all these adventures. You should be getting excited, Game Master. You should be getting ready to spring all this on your players, to give them this opportunity for adventure, and hope that they take onto it with both hands and just, really get into it. So, I just said all of this including an encounter, but did I explain all of this about being a Game Master entirely? Not entirely. So, as a Game Master, there's a couple of things you need to understand beyond just the rules. You need to understand your role, what you're doing in all of this. Besides knowing the adventure, besides knowing the rules makes you a referee. That's one hat that you put on. That's why, if the players have any questions, they come to you, because you're the referee. You are the person who stands pat and is hopefully impartial and can say, this is the way the rule works. Because, the rules aren't always crystal clear in all situations. So sometimes this rule applies, sometimes this rule applies. And you should try to be fair and even. That's how you get people to trust your judgment as a game master. That's one. And that's an important one, too, by the way. That is the back that the players have to put their... that is the wall your players have to put their back to, because they know the rules and they can trust them. Anything else, it's just chaos. So, that's number one. Number two, and this is, to me, one of the most important hats that you can put on, that is the narrator hat. You are the player's eyes, ears, all of their senses. Anything that happens in the world doesn't happen unless you tell them it happens. Their characters are blind, mute, deaf, everything, until your world comes alive before them, and it's your role to give that to them. So, every Game Master has their own style, right? Some Game Masters take an adventure like Lost Mines and Phandelver and read the stuff in the little text box exactly as it is. Because they built a pretty good world, and the writing is fairly evocative. Many game writers really well, we're kind of novelists in a different milieu, so we're good at writing out descriptions of what somebody sees and hears. But some people really like to embellish on that and make the world more theirs, and that's fine. As long as the players are getting enough information to act, they know what's going on, they know what their characters hear, see, feel, in many cases know about what's going on as you interpret things from their skills, perhaps, and their relative statistics. You might be able to tell them more things or dwell on things that'll really be important to them in an adventure. Also, along with being a narrator, again, nothing else really happens unless it's narrated, right? You also, you get to be everybody else. You are all of the NPCs. So you determine who they are, why they are, what they say, and what they do. And if it revolves determining something that's left up to chance, you decide what roles to make and what to add to them. And if they succeed or not is ultimately up to you as the game master. So, is it a lot more work than being a player? Oh, yes. Yes, it is. It's undeniably so. But is it worth it? Oh, yes. Yes, it is. So, by you deciding all of this, you playing all the roles, you make your world live and breathe before your players. If you portray a character, try your best, and as a brand new game master, this is tough. I'm not just laughing any of this off. This is very abstract stuff. But it's something that is a skill. You grow into it. It's easy for me to talk. I've been doing this for almost 40 years. And it is not hard for me, though, to empathize because I see all these game masters just getting their feet wet. Just taking their first wading steps into a huge ocean of possibilities. The limitless imaginations they're going to come across with their players adding into their world and coming to grips with perhaps varying sets of rules that they play different games. Yeah, it's not easy. But breaking it down, step by step by step, giving yourself the tools you need to succeed, and then allowing yourself to try. That's what makes a great game master. So being all of these characters, all with their own motivations and purposes, as you get better, your characterizations will get better. You'll understand motivations for characters better. If you're running a pre-published module, though, let the writers, advise you on how an encounter should be set up, how monsters might react, and look at your players as you're running games. See what they're enjoying. Seriously, honestly, modifying games on the fly is a great skill for a game master to have. So if your players are getting crushed because of an encounter you thought was relatively easy, had an extra wrinkle they just can't wrap their heads around, I'm not saying cheat, okay? Some game masters do. Some game masters roll a die and barely look at it and tell you what the result is, usually trying to spare their players from something unfortunate. A couple of poor game masters to punish players, and let's not go there. But I can advise you, though, if your players are really having a hard time, they're really struggling, crushing a whole group is an option. It's called a total party kill, TPK. And it's kind of a bummer, because it kind of ends the momentum of your story. If you even continue on that same adventure, you either have to come up with something very interesting, which may cheapen the whole affair if death has no sting, cuts down on the dramatic impression of, combat and violence in general, or you have to do something like start with a new group, and that really can suck the wind out of a group's sails. It really can. You get to decide, though. Sometimes the dice will just turn against players. Is it really making your story better to crush somebody because their dice are bad at a night? Every game master has their own style and their own ultimate answer to that. It comes with knowing your players, what they can take, what they like, and just trying to adapt it as best as you can. We can talk about these individual elements if you want. Feel free to leave in the comments or reach out to me in some way. You can find me on Dungeon Tutor or Facebook, and I'll make a video for you, or we can discuss these things. But really, these are the building blocks of being a game master. Understanding your role throughout the various steps of game mastering. So, we've already talked about being the referee, being the narrator, and being the rest of the world and everybody in it. There's a few other little elements, too, to being a game master. Being a bookkeeper. Ultimately, as a game master, you have to decide how to reward your players. There are a few options. In Dungeons & Dragons, there's a milestone system that can allow them to level up when their characters have hit certain benchmarks in your game story. Or there's an experience point track, which is all the way from the roots of Dungeons & Dragons, and it basically assigns everything of value and experience so that your characters will eventually level up if they accumulate enough experience by facing danger, doing cool things, etc. I have no preference. One or the other is fine, just pick one, and I'd recommend sticking to it at least through a campaign before switching to some other system. It's a fairly tried and true battle-tested system, and both of them work just fine. I favor a little bit more on the milestone side myself because, I think that the excitement should be about wrapping something up and then getting rewarded rather than, hey, congratulations, you just killed this random mob of goblins and that just gave you enough experience to go up a level. Yay. No, I like it celebrating big events. But also you have to think too, even if you're using a pre-published adventure, as far as what you're going to give players as rewards for these encounters. If you decide that the base for Dungeons & Dragons is to give out too much cash, you don't want your players to spend hours thinking about all the stuff they could buy, maybe you cut down on the amount of treasure they can get. You don't have to sweat that detail too much, but it could come in handy if you're going to make your own adventures. Then, knowing exactly how much to reward your players with is a delicate balance that every game master has to tread upon at some point. But, realistically, the major thing that you need at this point in game mastering is a skill that really only comes with practice, and that's called improvisation. You see, eventually, you're going to realize that in a pre-published adventure, there's always something left out. No single one shows everything that's available, and almost every group at some point will want to know more than just what's in the book, what's just in the adventure that is presented. Sometimes you might need to bring up a city guard, for instance, and the players interact with that person. Well, they have a name. Clearly, they were born with one. But you don't have one. So you have to make something up on the fly. Well, this is Guard Barnaby. What if the players take a shine to Guard Barnaby? What if down the road they want to go back and they want to talk to Guard Barnaby because they think they've got something with Barnaby? Well, he's still in your world. You've just created him by just slapping a name on, and maybe the players latch on to that. Maybe now you can take Guard Barnaby and decide that, you know what, outside of being on City Watch, which he does for 12 hours a day, maybe he likes to have a pint at the Blue Boulet Tavern. Now the players can go to the Blue Boulet Tavern, and hey, there's Barnaby! Let's talk to him. And they go over and talk to him, and maybe, hey, buy him a drink. Hey, you're doing a great job on the guard. We think you're great. Have you heard anything going on around town? And maybe that's the time they can get some information from Barnaby, and it all happened because of a random encounter, and you improvised. That is the kind of a skill that you come up with, coming up with names on the fly, interjecting things when the players try to go off the rails a little bit. That can be kind of a useful skill. Some people would say it's an absolutely essential skill, and I disagree with that. I think that you can run games without having a talent for improvisation. But it's the spackling and the grout that makes the world more seamless around your players. If you're good at improvising when details are needed, the players have questions that aren't explicitly spelled out in your resources, yeah, improvisation can be really handy. And that all depends on how well you understand your world, isn't it? Because if you really have your head in where your world is, coming up with details on the fly is a little bit easier because your world has consequences, it has real purposes for things to be there, If the players are in an Arctic setting and all of a sudden an owl bear shows up, it's a D&D creature, it's fun, and they're like, "What's an owl bear doing out here in the frozen tundra? I thought they were arboreal creatures. They dwell in forests." As a game master, if you understand your world, you could say, well, this one clearly was flushed out of its homeland by a great fire that took place to the south. And it's trekked up here, and now that it's in a different biome, it doesn't worry about the predators it used to have, so it finds game that's not expecting to be eaten by an owl bear. And its hide, its fur is extra thick, and its feathers are extra flowers. Ooh. Feathers are extra fluffy, and it looks bigger as a result because it's made a living up here for a while. Perhaps maybe it'll find a mate, and you'll have polar owl bears. Worse things could happen, and hey, it's your flexibility, it's your improvisation skills that might have made that happen, and now maybe the players will look forward to polar owl bears. But simply being able to answer those questions for your players, to let them know that there was some forethought, there is some ideas that you have that are being presented in front of them, will make them appreciate your game more. Now, couple bits of advice. I've given you the tool. These are all the tools that you need to be a game master. A few pieces of advice from somebody who's been doing it a long time. Number one, be kind to yourself. Some games aren't going to work right. God knows I've seen a few. It's okay to fail. It's okay to have a bad night. And it's even okay if your players didn't have the greatest of times. Learn from it. It's hard to learn from success after success. People who fail learn quickest. So if everything seemed easy to you, then you're going to run your game the exact same way again and again because it's always worked. Rather than, ooh, that didn't really work. I may have, tried to learn a new skill. That didn't work this time. I'm going to try something different the next time. Or I've canvassed my players. I've asked them, what do you guys think about this? What do you think I can improve? Take that kind of criticism, even if it's sometimes some pretty harsh criticism. Take it to heart. Try to understand where it comes from. If somebody says something hurtful, then, take it for what it's worth only. But, try to improve your craft by accepting that every once in a while it's not going to work out right. Try to understand your players. If you're going into something blind and you don't know your players, it's tough. But there's a couple of very vanilla things that you can put out right away in early encounters so that you can see how the players react and see what they key in on, and then just try to give them more of that. And, occasionally probe out a little bit and give them some other kinds of challenges and see if they take to that or if they absolutely don't want any part of it. And stay away from the things that they don't like. Make sure that your players and yourself feel comfortable. Don't get bullied or badgered into providing an experience other than what you're comfortable with. If, for instance, you have a mixed group, try to avoid humor or any kind of innuendo or really forcing anything on the group that some people might not enjoy. If you're going to play a game, for example, a game that I recently reviewed, Mazes and Minotaurs, and you have a mixed group, find out from them first if they're okay with, for instance, centaurs only being able to be male. If your players are like, wait a minute, I want to be a female centaur, and I really don't like that I can't be one, maybe it's time that you make a house call, make a in this world there are female centaurs as well. So that's fine. Female centaurs right alongside of the male centaurs, doing centaur archery and things. So try to make at least your initial impressions as neutral as possible and let your players imprint on that. And if anybody looks like they are really getting uncomfortable with anything going on at the table, as a game master, kill that as quickly as you can. Don't let seemingly little things to you possibly, but if your players really seem to be keying in on something and they don't like it, get rid of it. Whatever it takes, you've got to try to get your players comfortable. Otherwise, they're not going to have fun. And if you're not having fun, what's the point? That's why we're doing this, is to have fun together. So, whatever that is, if it's a part of your style, if it's a part of the story, that's under your control. You can change it. Even if it's for one player, even if there's that one player that the other people don't seem to care about very much, it's still your job as a game master to try to incorporate the players and try to make them all have a good, try to help them all have a good time. It's almost impossible to make somebody have a good time if they don't want to. But if it's something coming from another player that is bothering the other players, discuss it as soon as possible to nip it in the bud. If it's something that can be changed because a character is just broken, or somebody has decided they're going to make an offensive character, that's something that you as a game master should be in on the conversation on. Maybe ultimately it's something that's going to be that's going to require the players to talk to each other about it, but as a game master, you should be present because you are presiding over your game. You are trying to make sure that everything goes for the best. That is your responsibility to a certain extent. It's everybody's responsibility, but that burden hangs heavily on the game master. Don't forget that you are a participant too, and therefore should also be having fun. A lot of what I've just mentioned sounds like a lot of work, and truthfully it is, but it's work that we game masters gladly give to the group. And quite honestly, getting to reveal these story elements that we've enjoyed, either reading through and just can't wait to spring certain things on our players, or work that we've done to interweave the characters in artfully so that they're enmeshed in the story and really are living that experience. That's something that's got a worth and a value, and it should be entertaining as heck to you as a game master. If you give your own energy out to the group, you should be receiving energy back in. So a game master who isn't getting anything back from their players is guaranteed to be a frustrated game master. Even if they tell themselves it's fine, it's not. They're going to burn out rather quickly because you can't give and give and give of yourself and get nothing back, especially in a game. That's something that's very important. I think a lot of game masters don't quite portray that enough. But if you ever watch somebody who's game mastering, who's really good at it, I guarantee you a lot of it is because they find the joy in it and the entertainment value of just marveling at what their players come up with and enjoying their successes and occasionally challenging them to the very limits. That's fun. That's pleasurable. That's enjoyable. And it can make for a really good time that you earn more than you know everybody else is going to put in. You have to put in the most effort. And that's fine. Somebody has to, and it's both a pleasure and a burden for us. So don't forget to enjoy it along the way. Those are my bits of advice for game mastering: how to do it, how to start, how to progress, and how to get better at it. If you have any questions, by all means, let me know. I'll be glad to explain anything, lend my perspective, hear your problems, and offer some advice here and there. Maybe I'll make a video and other people who've been having your problems can come to that for help and advice. Maybe down the road you'll be giving me advice on something. We all learn different lessons, you know. And there are times when I admit I'm sometimes frustrated in my own games, or I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But this only works when we have dialogue and when we can discuss these things. So by all means. And if you don't want me turning something into a video, you just want to talk, you and me, I'm perfectly fine with that. You can reach out to me in my identity as Rob. Easy to find on the Dungeon Tutor because I'm the one who's putting up most of the videos and links. So feel free. I'm at your disposal to talk with if you need to, but I want to help you. I want to help you enjoy this hobby that I love so much, that I've given so much of my own time to. And if this little video, which has gotten rather long, but if this can help you, then I'm very glad that I took the effort and time to do it. And it is a general invitation for you to form a dialogue so that we can discuss your problems that you've been having, and eventually you can be the awesome game master that I'm pretty sure you can be. So, as always, if you like this, I am on YouTube, so feel free to like and share and all the good stuff. If you know somebody who's struggling with game mastering things, or maybe thinking about being a game master but not quite sure, if one of your players expressed an interest in game mastering, feel free to share this. This is for everybody. It's not just for one person. And if you want, again, me to discuss things other than Dungeons & Dragons, and there are a lot of fine games out there, quite honestly, I think Dungeons & Dragons gobbling up all the spotlight isn't always the healthiest thing for the gaming industry, which is why I'm more than willing to help anybody with any other game out there. Feel free to let me know, either by direct message, sending a note in the Dungeon Tutor Facebook group, leaving a comment on one of my videos, whatever you want to do. Perfectly fine, will make me deliriously happy to help. So, but ultimately, I'm just Rob, the Dungeon Tutor, and I'm at your disposal. It's been my pleasure to put this video out for you, and I'm hoping that another lesson down the road might be just as useful to you. So thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, farewell.